All right, let's take a look at these two hives. Now, I took a quick peek under the lid of these hives, and I think we've got some problems. So it's always helpful to look at some really good bees, and it's always helpful to look at some bad bees. And this is why I'm such an advocate of always making sure you've got more than one beehive. You know, the more beehives you have, the more you're able to compare everybody and see which ones are good and which ones are not so good. So let's take a look at these hives and check out some hives that may not be as good and see if we can figure out what is going on. So again, pop the lid. I'm not seeing a lot of bee population up here. So let's try to find out what's going on. When I'm in a hurry in the bee yard, I usually pop right to the middle of the frames. I mean, I don't waste time if I'm in a hurry, you know, starting at the very outside frame and working my way in. You know, I want to get right to the heart of the activity and see what is going on inside these hives. So looking at these middle frames, there's nothing going on. I mean, there's like no bee population up here to speak of. They've got honey. There's plenty of honey up here. They've probably got 30 pounds of honey, but there is no brood, and there are, you know, there's maybe a cumulative one frame of bees up in the top box. So I already know my problem is not underfeeding. It wasn't that they didn't get enough food. You're really not going to see a hive straight up die from enough food until the middle of the winter. So I know feeding and food isn't my problem. Looking at this bottom box, I may have 3 frames of bees. They had a pollen patty, and they ate some of that pollen patty. They ate most of the pollen patty, so that's a good sign. But there's still not a lot of bee activity going on. You know, 3 frames of bees is not enough for this hive to survive the winter. Again, I've just got honey, no brood yet. Looking towards the inside of this hive, again, no brood. I've just got honey and mostly empty frames. So this hive, if I put all the bees together, might have 2 or 3 frames of bees. So you can see this is what most of the frames look like. You know, just honey and not a lot of bees. So what happened? On a hive like this, it's pretty easy to tell what happened. They went queenless. So at some point, this hive lost their queen, and they're queenless, and they never raised a new queen. And we as beekeepers, me as a beekeeper, you know, didn't catch it in time to give them a new queen. This late in the year, you know, early October, I am not going to try to save this hive. You know, it's got a couple frames of bees, a lot of honey, but no brood. And so I am not going to bother saving this hive. In fact, I'm not even going to bother combining it with another hive. If they had, you know, 1 deep box full of bees, or a deep box 2/3 with bees, you know, maybe 6, 7 frames of bees, I would probably try to combine it with another hive. But since they've only got a couple frames of bees, no brood, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take each frame, and I'm just going to do that. I'm going to shake all the bees out of this hive, and I'm going to let them drift and join other hives. Now, I'm okay doing this because I see no signs of disease in this hive. You know, they've got no foul brood. They've got no brood at all. That makes it easy. And they've got, you know, we've treated all these hives for varroa mites, so I know they don't have a varroa mite issue, or at least not a severe one. They could have varroa mites that are a little on the high side, but since we treat it, I know it's not a severe infestation. And that's it. So I just shook all the bees out. I'm going to take this equipment, and you can do one of 2 things at this point. You can store this equipment for use next year, and your splits next year that you make in the spring are going to have an awesome box of honey ready to go. So if you make splits next year, you can give them these frames of honey, and that'll help your splits take off like crazy next year. Or you can set these boxes out, you know, 30 or 40 feet away from your bee yard, and let all your other hives rob out the honey, and then, you know, store this comb in wax moth crystals. And it'll only take, you know, a couple days in general for them to rob all the honey out, and then you can store those boxes. It's a little easier to store dead out hives without the honey in it. So I tend to prefer storing them without the honey. That way you don't have to worry about small hive beetle larvae getting in there and making a mess either. All you got to do is put wax moth crystals in there, store them in your garage, and let them, you know, sit there until next year. But if you really want to make a bunch of splits next spring, it's not a bad idea. You could store these with honey in them using wax moth crystals. The paradichlorobenzene works great for storing honey supers full of honey as well. Just keep an eye on them. It's getting a little late for small hive beetle larvae anyway, but especially if you're more in the southeast or Texas or along the Gulf Coast where it stays a little warmer longer, you may just want to check in on them every week. And if you start seeing any little larvae in there, pop them in the freezer for a couple of days to kill those larvae off. But yeah, I mean, it's sad to lose bees, but everybody loses bees. The comb is what's valuable. So your woodenware and your honeycomb is incredibly valuable, and it's going to help you start so much faster next year. And if you put a package of bees in this equipment or drop a nook in here, all the combs already drawn out, they're going to grow so much faster, and you've built value into that wax and that honeycomb. So don't feel discouraged. Everybody loses bees. You know, the average annual loss rate is 44%. That's for commercial beekeepers as well. And you know, every good beekeeper should be losing bees. You shouldn't be babying welfare hives throughout the year. You should be getting rid of the bees that didn't do well, taking care of the ones that did, and then rebuilding your population with the strong hives. And that's how you're a good beekeeper. So don't feel discouraged. It's normal. It happens to everybody all the time. Preserve the equipment and start over next year.